Andy Cart, the former Bush 43 chief of staff, with us now. Andy, this process is long. It is deliberate. Takes time. A lot of people fault the president for pushing this. He's certainly within his legal right to push it. He scares folks when he questions the propriety, the fairness of the system. That's another matter. But Al Gore doing this 20 years ago, that was perfectly fine. So I know it's a bit of a double standard. But what do you make of all of this?
Well, first of all, Neil, thank you for having me on, and I compliment you for the calm way you've been presenting these things, and you've got a big fan club here in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. With that, yes, it's a very different situation than it was in 2000. In 2000, we waited for all of the ballots to be counted. So the ballots were counted, then we challenged the results, kind of a recount process in Florida. And so James A. Baker III, one of the heroes of our democracy, and Joe Alba, who was the campaign manager for George W. Bush, put together a wonderful team of lawyers and others that would supervise the recounting of ballots and the certification of ballots in Florida. That's a very different situation than we have right now, where people are looking to have the vote counted. And then, after that is done, then you challenge the results. And so I think the process is different than for this 2020 counting, if you will, and what took place in the year 2000 when the Supreme Court had to basically certify that Florida did things all right. The ballots that they said were counted, and therefore the Electoral College could meet and cast its votes, with Florida voting for George W. Bush. That's a little bit different question that has been raised now is, are the votes that are even being counted credible? And we in 2000 let the vote count go forward until every ballot was counted, and then we challenged the veracity of those ballots. And we ended up proving that the veracity was credible, and yes, George W. Bush did win Florida.
You know, going back then, I mean, I think what's got people a little concerned is that the president took the leap on his own to argue this claim of fraud. He's perfectly within his rights, the way I see it. I mean, these are very close states, as you know, and some of them, you know, are not only within the margin of error, they're right on that line. So I can see the recounting of it, but the fraud claim has gotten a rebuke from the likes of, you know, Marco Rubio. We've heard from Chris Christie, Mitt Romney, Pat Toomey. Some who, you know, like the president, others maybe not such big fans of the president here. But how do you think about the way he is acting through this and the way he is presenting himself? Could he just let the count go on, not judge it one way or the other? What's the best way to comport yourself? I do remember with your old boss, he had the advantage of having the lead in Florida throughout this whole process. You could argue whether, you know, this going to that court, but he did have the advantage of the lead. He was planning concurrently at the time, acting almost as a president-elect in you know, planning for that transition. Democrats faulted him for that, but he was not sort of talking about, oh, this is a sham process, what they're going through right now. He did have the benefit of the time of having the lead. Right now, this president does not, but your distinction there between then and now.
Well, President George W. Bush, who didn't even know if he was president-elect, and he was very restrained and really did not make many public comments regarding what was happening, and even in his own mind. Fortunately, he and I had the privilege of spending a lot of time together to contemplate him being the president, so we could talk about who do you like, who do you want to be on the White House staff, who do you want to be in the cabinet. But he did not opine every day or make comments about what was happening down in Florida. He put his confidence in Jim Baker and Joe Alba and the team that they had put together to analyze the results and introduce challenges if they had to be made, and did it through the process. So he he wasn't trying to skew the debate. He was allowing for the debate to go forward without his voice. And it was one where he trusted the system to work. And unfortunately, the system had to go to the Supreme Court to prove that it worked. But he really had confidence in the system, and he was going to live by the results of that process.
You know, I'm no lawyer. I talk to a lot of smart lawyers who don't think it will, and to get to the Supreme Court, and the difference being that there are more states involved here. And if any one of them, with this counting process, were to tip to Joe Biden, let alone 2 or 3 that easily could as things stand now, it becomes a moot point. Do you buy that this will avoid the Supreme Court because just the sheer weight of states that are tipped in Joe Biden's favor as this count goes on will negate that?
Well, first, remember that under our Constitution, the states are responsible for the balloting and the counting. It's not a federal responsibility. It's a state responsibility. So they get the benefit of the doubt when you go to court. Did the state laws get implemented the right way? So that's the process that you go forward with. I actually think you have to have a little bit more confidence in the people who are empowered to allow us to have our vote cast with an expectation that it will be counted. Most of the professionals that are working right now to count ballots are doing it for the noble reasons. They're not looking to put their thumb on the scale. I honestly believe they're really doing what they consider to be meeting a responsibility of trust with the voter. And I know that here in New Hampshire, Bill Gardner, the Secretary of State, who's been Secretary of State for a very long time, and a Democrat, he prides himself on making sure that there's a lot of integrity that is held as a source of pride for the people who are the town clerks and the voting official or the vote counting officials in the local governments. And so that's really replicated across the whole country. There are very few people involved in the counting process who are looking to skew the results. They just want to be accurate in what they do and have confidence that they have reflected the will of the voters. And the will of the voters will determine, I think, the outcome. And I really do not think nefarious actors are getting their way into the process to skew the results.
Yeah, it's a close election. You know, real quickly, and I know our producers will kill me here, but I love having you on just to pick your brain on this one last issue. We know that Joe Biden is going to address the nation tonight at 8 p.m. I can only imagine he is thinking, maybe hoping that by that time, one of these states will be called in his favor. Any one of them, a combination of them, is going to put him over the top. Should he, at that point, say, I'm your next president?
If there is a confirmation that he has carried one of these states that we're still wondering what is the vote count, if there's confirmation, I have no problem with him saying, I'm ready to accept the results of the election, and I think I've won the Electoral College. If the results are not known, I think that he should still, I have no problem with him making a statement, but I still think that he should say, I look for every vote to be counted and see what the results are. I'll respect those results.
Andy Card, thank you. Very good catching up with you on this.